So welcome back to Three Kingdoms Total War and to another battle replay, and today we have a battle on one of the minor settlements, or one of the resource settlements as they're called in this game. And it is a bit of a strange shaped map, as I'm sure you can see down there in the bottom corner. This is one of the rice paddy maps that you can fight on, but it's actually quite unlikely that you'll come across this map in the campaign, purely because it is in the southern portion of the map. So unless you're playing as Sun Jian and you don't colonise the south rapidly, chances are that you'll be able to make Sun Jian capitulate before you ever get to this point. But even so, it's a very interesting map because it is very choke point heavy. There are obviously two corridors which lead right up to the back of the settlement, and then there are a few connecting roads in the middle as well. So yeah, it was interesting to see how this one would go, because there certainly wasn't a map that we had done up till this point that was quite so choke point heavy. So this is going to be a 2v2 with myself, Metgrim, Froggy and Master Blaster, who are going to be playing here today. And you can certainly see, you know, for the most part there is a woo theme going on for both the defenders and the attackers. But we'll go through my army first of all, seeing as we're right here. And I have a completely woo theme to my army. So we have Taishitse as one of my generals, and then the siblings Sun Quan and Swen Ren. So let's have a little look at what I have for an army. So I have 3 units of the mercenary archers. The main draw of bringing the mercenary archers is they do have actually a decent amount of AP in melee, because they do pull out an axe when they are engaged in melee. But also they do have slightly higher armor piercing at range than standard archers as well. Now they are a little bit more expensive than standard archers, but to my mind it's certainly worth it. Armor piercing at range brings them a little bit more into line with perhaps crossbows than other standard archers. But yeah, it's a good unit, but it is fairly expensive and obviously unique to the Wu officers. And then back here we can see that I have, of course, Taishitse. Again, I've fully upgraded him. He is a bit of an enigma when it comes to the Sentinels. He shares alongside Huangzhong the fact that he is primarily an archer sentinel. So of all of the sentinels, I think he is actually the weakest in melee. But the fact that he does have a bow allows him to deal quite a lot of damage before being committed as that melee tank that sentinels are. He's also got a couple of units of the Jian Sword Guards with him. Obviously Jian Sword Guards, I'm still not convinced in campaign that they are efficient to bring. In a multiplayer battle it is different, however, because for most factions the Jian Sword Guard might be the highest tier swordsman you can actually bring. There are a few obviously unique units and a few like specific units that you can bring which are better. But for a lot of Sentinels, because of what faction they're in, they don't have access to any unique or faction-specific units that they can use. Also got a couple of units of the mighty Yellow Dragons. The Yellow Dragons, of course, very strong in melee. Big charge, a lot of armor-piercing damage. They don't actually have that much armor, but they do have a good shield value. So as long as they're facing down enemies from the front, that shield will come into play. And they shouldn't take too much damage against arrows and other sort of other forms of damage. Several units of the mercenary infantry as well. We've already seen plenty of these in the Three Kingdoms replays I've shown. I'm a big fan of the mercenary infantry actually, because they're not overly expensive, and I don't think there are any other, well there are a couple, but they're bandit units that are unshielded, but there are very few mid-tier axemen in the game. And Sun Jian and the 2 bandit factions are the only ones that really have access to them, and obviously here we have the Merc infantry. Nice with a shield as well, a little bit more reliable in a siege than the bandit units would be, because the bandit units are without a shield. So having those shields will of course be nice against the many enemy archers that are arrayed against us. I actually have a couple of archers from my ally over here as well, because he can vanguard deploy his archers. So he's already in range of the towers, which of course we're going to be looking to burn down with fire arrows. And then I also have a couple of units of these guys here, the Protectors of Heaven. The most expensive unit of infantry in the game, I believe. Alongside, well, there is a couple of unique units again, which might have something to say about that, but they're definitely the most expensive that is available to every Han faction. And obviously they're terrific glaive infantry, very good against mounted units, so if there was any form of sort of sally out from enemy cavalry, my glaive infantry was right here, ready to reinforce my allies' archers. And then finally at the back we have of course Sun Quan, who commanders I wasn't actually convinced about until very recently. Now however I'm actually a big fan of commanders. I think they do certainly have a place in an army, because the buffs they can provide are very, very substantial. And of course Swen Ren, who is a vanguard. Again, like Taishitse, I've gone for a little bit more of a ranged approach here. She is still very strong in melee, don't get me wrong, but she is a little bit more focused around using her bow and her Heartseeker ability to really burn down enemy general health, rather than being the all-around melee powerhouse that some of the other vanguards are. Lu Bu comes immediately to mind there. And then I've got a couple of units of mounted saber militia as well, just some cheap saber cavalry, so that if the enemy front lines do collapse and capitulate, I'm able to run through and start causing havoc in their back lines. Now, we'll move on to my allies' army, who this is going to be Metgrim. He's got a couple of units of Onyx Dragons, actually, so he's really splashed the cash on his archers. Onyx Dragons are, of course, fantastic at range. Ranged units really are very strong in this game as well, so having a unit of really quality archers like the Onyx Dragons can really help you lay down a marker over your opponent. And they are going to be alongside the strategist Kong Rong, who, of course, a faction leader. Kong Rong, probably one of the most useful strategists in campaign, just because you can beat him from the start, whereas with Zhuge Liang and Sima Yi, you have to wait quite a long time before they actually pop up in the game world. Also a trebuchet, so he's going to be able to bombard the settlement as well, which, of course, considering the open nature of a resource settlement, he's going to be able to go straight for the units. We also have a unit of standard archers once again over here, and again they're going to be sent in first to try and burn down the towers. And then his central infantry force, so he's got them all in very nice and neat formations. He's got mercenary infantry in shield wall, of course, like the other axemen. They can form shield wall, giving them nice charge resistance and arrow resistance, ready to move in. Obviously they can't move quickly while they're in this formation, but they don't particularly need to. There's some saber infantry as well, who are also in this formation. Again, much like the mercenary infantry, they're basically the same, only as swordsmen, but of course the distinction is every faction gets access to saber infantry, all of the Han Kingdom factions anyway, whereas only the Wu officers get access to the mercenary infantry. More saber infantry, and then there's some axeband over here as well. Axeband, of course, the lower tier axemen, which again, every Han Kingdom faction gets access to them. He also has Sun Jian and Zhao Yun, two of, if not the two most potent sentinels in the game. Zhao Yun is probably the better duelist, just because his elemental vigor is so good, keeping that advantage he has in melee. But Sun Jian also has the Flames of the Phoenix, which is traditionally a vanguard ability, which allows him to deal a little bit more damage to units. So two very, very difficult officers to bring down. And he also has some Pearl Dragons and some Protectors of Heaven. We've already spoken about the Protectors of Heaven, of course, but the Pearl Dragons, very lightly armoured, but they do have a huge melee evasion of 72%. And also they do actually have a ranged block chance from the front. I guess this is because of like superhuman reflexes, or the fact they just use those very thick glaives to try and block some arrows. But they do have a ranged block chance, albeit the rest of their shield stats here, so shield evasion and shield armour, they have none. Armour really is where the Pearl Dragons fall down a little bit. And now we'll go on to the defenders. So just sort of trying to go through the compositions a little bit more quickly. We have obviously the two towers, which are in place here, but we will obviously be trying to burn them down on both sides of the river. Again, we actually have some clones on the battlefield today, so we have 3 Zhao Yuns. We also have 2 Sun Jians, but the other 2 officers that the defenders have should be... yeah, so we have Zhang Kai and Sun Ce and Liu Bei, so they are going to be not used by us. So again, duplicate officers is something I will try to avoid in any replays I show of Three Kingdoms in the future, because it is a little bit goofy to see like multiples of the same officer running around. It does take you out of the game a little bit, in my opinion. But we do have some Saber Militia here on the front line. Obviously, again, very basic swordsmen. They're just here to hold the line while other things do the damage, including, you can see back here, some G Militia. So they've gone for some cheap units on the front line alongside the fake Sun Jian. We've got some more G Militia back here. We've got some Saber Militia also. We've got we've got 1 unit of Yellow Dragons. Yellow Dragons, of course, very, very damaging against armour. Archer Militia up here, formed up on the other side of the bank, ready to loose their volleys. We've got Liu Bei as well, who is, again, one of the better commanders in the game because he has a unique encouragement ability. And he's also not terrible in melee, honestly, Liu Bei. He's obviously not up to the same level as his 2 sworn brothers, but he can look after himself against quite a few units, actually. Archer Militia back here as well, another unit of the Yellow Dragons. Moving on over here, we also have more G Militia, some more Saber Militia, again G Militia. Zhao Yun is on the front line over here, so obviously a very powerful sentinel with some Saber Militia. The towers also should be giving him a hand. We have the Men of the Forest over here, so again a sort of neat skirmisher unit that you have. It is a Yellow Turban unit, the Men of the Forest, so they're going to be in Zhang Kai's retinue, of course. They do pull out those axes. They're, you know, a decent all-around unit. They are relatively low tier though, like most of the Yellow Turban units. You can get them very early on, and they are better than the equivalent militia units from the Han Kingdoms, but as soon as you start getting up in quality, the Yellow Turbans do fall behind a bit. Protectors of Heaven and Saber Militia again, guarding this choke point over here. We have Sun Ce over here, who is a terrific general in campaign, actually. In my Sun Jian campaign, which is the only one I've got to the end of, his bonuses to all cavalry in your faction make him a real beast, especially alongside the mercenary cavalry that Wu can bring. More Men of the Forest. We have some more G Militia. Another Zhao Yun. We have over here Yellow Dragons. Some more G Militia, some more Protectors of Heaven and Save Militia. And then at the back, we have Zhang Kai with, I believe, some Yellow Turban Reclaimers. Indeed we do. So yes, the heavy Yellow Turban Spear Guard, as well as some more Protectors of Heaven. So, without further ado, let's begin. Kong Rong over here. So it is going to be an interesting battle, this, because we haven't really played on a map like this up to this point. You can see that the first order of business is simply going to be, as with any settlement, burn down the towers, because the towers are general killing machines. If you leave them be, they will be able to kill your generals off very, very quickly, do a lot of damage as well. But you can see that already both myself and my ally sending in our fire arrows to do a lot of damage. Again, I'm not really sure why Sun Ren is throwing shade at Sun Jian for being related to Sun Tzu, because of course they both are. But Zhao Yun coming in here to try and go after the archers, but that's a very foolish move really, because the Protectors of Heaven are right here. Zhao Yun may be very, very strong, but surrounded by Protectors of Heaven while he's on horseback is going to be very, very bad for him. Meanwhile, I'm not really sure which one is which here, but Sun Jian is chasing Sun Jian. Again, this is why I'm not really going to show replays in the future where you can see the colour, of course, but I'm not really going to show replays in the future where there are duplicates of generals for this very reason. It can be very difficult to keep track of, especially seeing as Zhao Yun and Sun Jian make up a good portion of the generals that are on the field today. It's a little bit weird. But yeah, Zhao Yun and Sun Jian taking on the red team's Sun Jian. And again, a bit too bold, this. I mean, sending out your generals all on their lonesome is not really going to achieve a great deal. But yeah, breaking up the advance is one thing, but using your general to do that is, unless you feel confident that you can actually affect some kind of change, perhaps if you back them up with some cavalry. But sending them out all on their lonesome. Generals are strong, but they're not so strong that they can solo entire armies. Not even Lu Bu can do that. Unless you're very early on in the campaign and he's up against full militia stacks. And even then, if he's on red hair, G militia will still mess him up something fierce if you leave him in melee for too long. Meanwhile, a lot of my mercenary infantry charging forward, getting ready to assault this position, because you can see they have pulled back quite a lot of their units. The only thing that they have left over here are a very thin line of Saber militia who are still taking some damage, and of course the mercenary archers do have a little bit more armor piercing. So trying to punch through those wicker shields, and there go the mercenary infantry. You can see that they are sending down some reinforcements now, so some G militia coming down to try and help hold the line. But again, my mercenary infantry are of decent quality, and you can see that that is actually a hail of arrows ability from Tai Shi Tse, who's getting close in to use his bow to also start burning down the enemy. You can see that Sun Jian, the enemy team's Sun Jian, has taken a huge amount of damage from his excursion into our territory. You can see my mercenary infantry doing the business though, and you can also see that both of my Jian sword guards are also on the way down. Over on the other side, just to have a quick cursory glance at what's going on over here, again very similar. The fires have taken root, and the defensive lines are still holding strong, but you can see that those archers are still utilising their fire ammunition. The Onyx Dragons are also starting to really bombard the defensive position across the way there. Really starting to push in with a lot of my units, the mercenary infantry on the front line, as well as my Jian sword guards. And I think you can see that there's a lot of my mercenary archers now coming forward, really starting to bombard the G militia, unshielded units, very, very vulnerable to this sort of fire. And I think actually, if we have a look over here, you can see Sun Jian here. Yep, there he goes. Both Suen Ren and Tai Shi Tse were using their bows to try and shoot him down, and he is now dead. You can see there's a huge amount of projectiles still flying back and forward. Archers are such a dominant force in this game, of course. Anyone who's played on campaign or custom battles knows the strength that archers can bring your army, which is why I'm trying to utilise my mercenary archers to really burn down these front lines quite quickly. You can see that my ally Zhao Yun is right in the front of this engagement as well. Liu Bei using his Stone Bulwark ability there to give them a range block chance, so that will mean that my archers are going to be largely useless for the time being. Liu Bei is really charging on in there to try and go after Zhao Yun, but Tai Shi Tse using his Hail of Arrows ability again Again, there's another Zhao Yun, so things are going to get quite confusing once again. But this is still an engagement we should feel pretty good about, because all of our supporting infantry is of much higher quality than all of their militia units. They are sending down some yellow dragons now, though, so that might change things up a little bit. Well, let's go and see what's happening over here. You can see there's a lot of routing units. All of those militia just weren't up to the task of holding on against those fire arrows. There is another force of units, however, which is over here forming up now. Saber militia and G militia once again. More Saber militia, of course. However... Ooh, and there goes the trebuchet as well, starting to bombard the enemy position, going after the yellow dragons. Very limited damage achieved there, though. Some men of the forest back there as well. You can see more routing. Very drained units of G militia. And now Mekrim is also going to launch his assault on this side of the minor settlement. Taishitse and Sun Quan are over here, as well as Sun Ren, actually. You can see that now, without the support of those generals, the direct support of those generals in melee, a lot of these militia are starting to collapse under the weight of my superior quality infantry on the front line. Really, it's only the yellow dragons that are remaining now. I'm still taking quite a lot of damage from archers, but all of these units are shielded, and all of them have got decent armour as well. So ultimately, I'm not terribly worried about how this is going. And also, you can see there Taishitse once again utilising his close range burst ability there with his bow to start really burning down the enemy, and that will of course also, suppressing fire has a little bit of a debuff. It's a very short-lived debuff. Sun Ren is just shouting over and over there, so we'll move back over to the other side of the field as the enemies start to engage once again. Again, a lot of militia, but also some yellow dragons, which have taken quite a lot of damage, so you can see that the archers and the trebuchet have been focusing down to do a little bit of damage. But Mekrim also has some Saber infantry on the front line, just holding them in place, allowing his Onyx dragons to really do the business. Very, very powerful unit, of course. And now you can see Taishitse is in there. He actually ran out of ammunition, so I'm now getting him in there, doing what a Sentinel does best, and just tanking a lot of damage here on the front line. He's actually off his mount as well, because I didn't want him to take too much damage at the hands of the G. You can see that he's actually taking a lot of damage there. The yellow dragons are no joke. And again, even against the Sentinel, Taishitse is one of those generals which is going to take a lot more punishment than other types. Even Zhao Yun over here, both of them are on foot, and both of them are taking a good amount of damage to the yellow dragons, one of the strongest infantry units in the game. And actually, I pull him out here because I'm like, he's going to die if I leave him in there, and I need my generals for later on in the battle. There's some men of the forest which are out of ammunition, a little bit better than other archers, well, than just sort of standard militia in melee. But as they move in, my archers have got a good shot on them to start really burning them down. So a few good volleys there. Charging Taishitse in there once again. Try and cause a bit of a morale shock, fighting alongside Zhao Yun there. See what he is able to achieve. Again, nice buffs coming in there. Sun Quan, being nearby, is able to confer a lot of nice buffs onto my troops, which is one of the reasons why I've really warmed to commanders actually as a general type. They were my least favourite by quite some way when I first started playing the game, because I always thought, well, I still feel as though strategists are superior, but commanders, they can certainly hold their own. Sun Jian is over here now. Again, you can see that the enemy really starting to struggle. All of these militia tier units are just not going to be able to hold up for long under the superior quality of the units that we have fielded. Saber infantry, much stronger than the Saber militia and the G warriors, and also now you can see that they were Pearl Dragons, and now with the Pearl Dragons, there's no way that this front line, especially with the impetuous charge buff that Sun Jian confers on his troops, you can see that this choke point is starting to lose ground. The Yellow Dragons have done a very good job at holding us back for longer than we would have ideally liked, but we can now see Sun Quan is on his way over. And you can actually see the Yellow Dragons are now pulling off the front line to block Sun Quan's charge, but I'm not going to charge into the Yellow Dragons from the front, of course, but now they are not on the front line, which means that that front line is going to collapse all the quicker. The Yellow Dragons are the thing really holding that front line together, so pulling them off means that they're essentially surrendering that choke point to us. Meanwhile, heading back over here, you can see that we have broken through here at this point. Finally, the morale shocks have paid dividends, and I still have reserve infantry that I can move in. So I have taken a little bit more attrition than I would have ideally liked, but we're still through. And now I have my mounted Sabre Militia Cavalry in here as well, so we've got a bit of cavalry charging in and around the enemy positions. This front line is starting to break. You can see that the Yellow Dragons, when their shields are not pointing at the enemy, this is a real problem for them because they don't have a lot of armour. So when they're getting shot in the back, you can see how quickly these Yellow Dragons died off, and they would have actually just been better off fighting to the death on that front line, getting a few more kills. But now, of course, there's nothing to stop me from recharging what's left of that position. So Sun Quan and his mounted Sabre Cavalry are going to come in here and do some damage. And there we go. Obviously, he is a commander, so he's not the best at this. And again, they are melee cavalry as well, so they're not going to have as high a charge as shot cavalry, but this is still going to be exactly the sort of thing we need to just force our way through this position. And there they go. Simple as that. Those archers still burning down those Yellow Dragons. I do have my other unit of cavalry over here as well, so Zhao Yun has taken a fair amount of damage. So too has Tai Shi Tse. But Kong Rong, Sun Jian, Sun Ren and Sun Quan are all in good health. Well, up here at the top of the hill you can see they have actually got a fairly tough defensive position waiting for us. Of course, the Sabre Militia and the Protectors of Heaven, but also they have Sun Se, who as a vanguard is stronger than his sister in melee at the very least. Sun Se is arguably one of the best vanguards in the game in campaign just because of the bonuses he gives. It really is a contest between him and Ma Chao as to who is the best heir that you start the game off with. I might give the slight edge there to Ma Chao though, purely because that faction is a little bit more focused around its cavalry in general. But you can see now that Mekrim forming up his army inside the settlement. Axband, as well as the mighty Pearl Dragons, of course. There you can see the Onyx Dragons. Kong Rong, of course, the strategist, is not going to be terribly useful in direct combat, should it come down to that, but we do still have a lot of glaive infantry. That is still routing units that routed through Mekrim's army and ended up getting butchered for it. You can see that I'm beginning to sort of shuffle my men up the hill a little bit. So I do have my mercenary archers coming in, and it was my hope that their superior armour would allow me to skirmish quite nicely with the archers at the top of the hill. So we can see there are some men of the forest over here. However, these men of the forest do have nature's ally because Liu Bei is right there, so they do have a little bit more morale than they would normally have, which is a blessing for the Yellow Turbans, whereas me, my generals are nowhere near, so unfortunately for me, my mercenary archers are actually looking like routing quite quickly here. It was my hope that I could out-skirmish the basic Yellow Turban archers, but unfortunately I was wrong, so those mercenary archers getting butchered very, very quickly there. Men of the forest proving themselves to be quite potent indeed. Over on this side though, Mekrim is also starting to move forward. You can see that he is moving forward in Glaive War, which is going to be a very potent ability in melee. But once again, there's another unit of those men of the forest back there, which are laying down a bit of suppressive fire. Of course, the Pearl Dragons do have a decent range block chance from the front, so it's not the end of the world. But still, a bit of extra damage we could do without. There's another Zhao Yun over here as well, unfortunately for us. It's unsurprising that Zhao Yun is one of the more popular generals to bring in multiplayer because he is very strong. Of all the Sentinels, he is the strongest. Elemental Vigor is a very potent ability for a Sentinel to have. More arrows going in, but you can see that the Pearl Dragon's holding up. Well, Spear Wall means range block chance is negative 100%, so unfortunately this means it's taking away their range block chance, really. They are going to get into melee though without crippling casualties, but unfortunately for them there are, at the back of this line here, some Protectors of Heaven, so it's going to take a lot more than that to force our way through. I also have Sun Quan over here so that we can buff our way up on this side of things. You can see that back over on my side, where it's just me, I have sent over Sun Quan and my cavalry to help out my ally. But over here on this side, things are not going great for me. I'm sending forward my mercenary archers once again, trying to do what damage I can, but I'm having very limited success indeed. So while the initial engagements went well, suddenly things are turning a bit sour for me on this run. You can see over here that buffs coming down for our forces. And again, it's going to be a real war of attrition over on this side. Having a look from on high, the Yellow Dragons facing off against the Pearl Dragons and then some supporting infantry, but the Pearl Dragons Actually not terribly damaged, there's some more axe band charging in as well. So again, a real classic choke point battle here. And this is probably the map that I've seen which would be most conducive to this sort of fight. It's certainly very much a corridor-based battle. My Protectors of Heaven are charging in, so it's my hope that sending forward a unit of stronger infantry would actually do some good work. A devastating roar there coming down from Sun Ce, and that has tanked my unit's morale. They only have 3 morale remaining. They're already wavering, and faced with another unit of Protectors of Heaven as well as a potent vanguard like Sun Ce fighting on the front line here, killing off 3 with a single sweep. And that's going to be enough to rout the Protectors of Heaven, and that's not an easily achieved feat. They are one of the most elite units in the game, and they were sent packing there, so I'm sending forward more men. I'm making the mistake here of trickling forward my units in blobs that aren't big enough, and I'm being made to pay for it here. So the same philosophy applies here as it does in Medieval 2, really. In that dribbling your units in like that is not going to be terribly effective. But here you can see the Trebuchet has got a nice blob to aim for. There is also the potential for some devastating friendly fire, but this is a blob which is simply, it's too tempting not to go after, let's be honest. We've got here archers. We also have the friendly Zhao Yun, who's going after some yellow dragons. Sun Jian is still mounted. Kong Rong also using his Wisdom of the River. That's one of my favourite strategist abilities, to lower the enemy's melee evasion and armour by 100%. It makes them much weaker for a time, and that should be enough to allow us to do some substantial damage to those yellow dragons and the G militia which are on the front line. Meanwhile, 3 enemy generals on the front line over here, but I do have yellow dragons, I do have mercenary infantry, I do have my archers that are out of ammunition just coming forward for some extra muscle on the front line. Swen Ren is also out of ammunition, so I'm sending forward her. Enemies are starting to think about routing in places. Also, Swen Ren will be able to do a lot of damage to Liu Bei. Both Zhao... Well, there we go. That was actually Sun Ren's ability. Flames of the Phoenix there, doing some nice damage in an AoE, but I did decide to get her out of there because she was taking some damage very, very quickly. Obviously, there are Protectors of Heaven nearby, and Zhao Yun is a stronger single combatant than Swen Ren. Taishitsu is coming forward. I'm a little bit concerned again that my army is simply going to fall apart. My axemen on the front line should be a little bit stronger, but the enemy is committing more and more men to hold me back, which should mean that, yeah, there are no real reinforcements. I mean, there's Zhang Kai threatening to come in here now, but this is pretty much it for this choke point over here. And you can see that Sun Quan and Kong Rong applying buffs and debuffs to all of these men, and the yellow dragons are slowly but surely starting to fall by the wayside. Zhao Yun and Sun Ce over on this side holding the line, but you can see that once again the enemy yellow dragons coming forward. Sun Ce using again the Flames of the Phoenix, that standard vanguard ability to do a lot of damage. Taishitsu using his ability once again. Zhao Yun is very low now, and Sun Ce actually charging in maybe a little bit too far there, because he's in and amongst the Protectors of Heaven now. Some returning axemen. He is quite isolated. He is in danger of dying off here. He needs those reinforcements and Zhao Yun to get to him quickly before he starts taking too much damage. I mean, vanguards are more at home here than any other kind of general, to be fair, but it's still elite units he's having to take on, and even then solid mid-tier units backing them up. Morale has proven to be a real issue for me over on this side, though. Fighting uphill into a very solid position has proven to be not the easiest task. So I'm sending forward both of my generals at this point. Taishitsu and Swen Ren, I'm just going to commit them both to melee and hope we can start doing some real damage here. Because both of the enemy generals are starting to get a little bit lower as well. Again, another Flames of the Phoenix doing a nice amount of damage there. The Zhao Yun over on this side, the enemy Zhao Yun has fallen, at least one of them. So Sun Jian is right in there as well. Liu Bei was coming over to buff things up. Things aren't going to go too well from there. The buffs of Kong Rong and Sun Quan really proving to be the difference maker here, because I didn't have those buffs over on this side, and the enemy is actually turning the tide against me once again. Over time, I should be able to win. You can actually see that my cavalry is coming in here now as well to try and do some damage off the charge. I think Swen Ren She did die there. So she was killed off, and Taishitsu is also routing. So both of my generals are gone, but also so is Zhao Yun, who's shattered. So the only general left over here is Sun Ce. And he does have a decent amount of support still. Oh no, there's Sun Ran. She is still alive. But spoilers, that doesn't last for too much longer. She does die in here, and that's unsurprising because she is going up against Protectors of Heaven. She is still on horseback. And also her brother is there, and her brother is the superior combatant in melee. And there she goes. Brutal. Kinslayer. There's Zhang Kai as well. I'm actually a little bit surprised Zhang Kai wasn't committed sooner, because he's a very strong general. The Yellow Turban generals across the board are all very, very strong. There is actually some broken things you can do with Yellow Turban generals, which we will go into, I think, at a later date. Zhang Kai starting to pull back. You can also see over here that there isn't much of the enemy left. I mean, to be fair, between Liu Bei and Sun Ce, they could win this, but it's also... it doesn't really matter too much. It is a bit of a moot point. You can see that the Mounted Saber Militia are going to try and chase down Liu Bei. Because over here, while they committed a lot of reinforcements over to stop my advance, and they were successful, there was much less reinforcements heading over here to help out this choke point. And with the buffs that the commander and the strategist were giving, you know, this was always going to be the more fruitful avenue of attack for us. You can see that Sun Quan is sort of pulling back now, because his assistance is no longer really needed on this front line anymore. Sun Ce, though, is still... Sun Ce. Again, I'm sure that I'm getting a lot of these pronunciations wrong. Chinese is hard. But yeah, he's performed obviously against mercenary archers. He's going to be able to slice his way through tons of these guys. You know, he's actually carving his way through them at an alarming rate, and they're not bad archers in melee either, which goes to show what a beast vanguards can be against units in melee. Not quite as strong against other generals, but still, Mounted Saber Militia. There are a few units back here as well, Protectors of Heaven and Reclaimers actually, as Liu Bei comes over here. But it's not looking good for the defending forces here. Again, yet more arrows. The choke point is still being fought for here. There goes the Trebuchet once again. Flaming shot, -4 morale. Still taking arrow fire. Still with the nearby support of Kong Rong and the two sentinels, Sun Jian and Zhao Yun. Trebuchet fire also convincing Zhang Kai maybe he would rather be elsewhere. Sun Jian using his impetuous charge ability, which there's a lot of buffs coming in very, very quickly there, in addition to now Nature's Ally giving a little bit more. Yeah, you can see that tons and tons of buffs on the infantry at this point, as well as the range support causing that infantry to think about routing. Over on this side, Sun Ce finally flew too close to the sun. Some Jian Sword Guards, a few Protectors of Heaven as well, and he finally routed. He might come back, but it's also quite unlikely. There's some Mounted Saber Militia cavalry that can chase him off the battlefield there. Liu Bei is still alive, and he did actually manage to rout the Mounted Saber Militia cavalry. But what will Liu Bei be able to achieve is the question now. Let's see what's going on over here. There's still these generals. There goes another break. And you can see that I did actually manage to get a couple of units of my infantry right around the back, and now we're attacking in the rear, which should be enough to finally finish this fight off. I've got some yellow dragons coming in as well. So finally this choke point is going to fall, and of course with it, victory for the attackers is pretty much guaranteed. There's still of course those mercenary infantry which Macgrim has held in reserve, which is nice. Some Axe Band right at the back of the map as well, but not the most elite units. Some Pearl Dragons and some Protectors of Heaven on the way. Liu Bei, Zhang Kai and a couple of units of higher tier infantry are all that really remains, but army losses are fairly likely to bite them before anything else does. So as the enemy, well, as our generals force our way through. And yeah, you can see there that because it's the Yellow Turbans have this problem with them, I think, where they're affected by morale shocks a little bit more readily than others, so the remaining Yellow Turban and all of Froggy's units, because of the army losses he had already sustained, have routed off. Liu Bei, on the other hand, he's still fighting on. And I think this is because Liu Bei may very well be unbreakable when you upgrade him fully. Yes, he is unbreakable. Which is why, otherwise Master Blaster, playing as Liu Bei here, his army also would have been afflicted by army losses. So this is the thing, you can't just leave a couple of units of elites at the back and hope that they will fight to the death, because army losses will get them, even if the unit is, you know, very high morale usually, unless they're unbreakable. Unfortunately, they won't be able to achieve much. So you can see Kong Rong is on the way up here, as well as Sun Quan. Not exactly the strongest combatants, but they are the most healthy generals that are left on the field. What is Liu Bei going to do here as he forces his way through? He might actually be able to break those... No, he manages to kill off a few of the Protectors of Heaven, but he's not going to be able to kill them off. And I think this fight ends with a duel between Liu Bei and Sun Quan, but of course it's going to be a very much a final act of defiance from Liu Bei more than anything else, as Sun Quan is in perfect health. Both of them are commanders as well. Kong Rong is also chasing him down. Kong Rong, of course, cannot duel though. Here we go. Neither of them wanting to take the first bout. Here we go. A duel for the ages, I'm sure this will be. And there we go. Slaughtered. A Pyrrhic victory indeed, and you know, that is a very fair assessment. My army was actually knackered by the end of that. I had very few units left. In fact, I think Sun Quan was the only unit I had left on the field. You can see huge amount of kills there from Sun Ce. He really did. He was a real problem for my army. You can see based on the amount of men I had left. Grim obviously had quite a few more. It is a little bit skewed though, because when the battle is over, technically I only had Sun Quan left, and it said I had 697. So obviously when you're the victor, it sort of bigs up the amount of men you had left a little bit. Even so, you know, a fun battle nonetheless, and I do like the minor settlements as well in this game. And again, I do hope that, you know, people are digging Three Kingdoms, because I really do. I think this is the best Total War for quite some time, and I'm really enjoying myself playing the game. So hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.